and I'm really pleased to be able to share this project with everyone now that we are 2 years into it. So I'm going to be talking about She Played Here, mapping history on the Women's Baseball Heritage Trail, and let's dive right into it. So the Women's Baseball Heritage Trail is actually a very uncomplicated project. At its core, it's a visual representation and resource for tracking the spots around the world that document and celebrate women's involvement in baseball. So here are some of the things that you will find on the trail. This is what it's made up of. Significant sites, like I said, ballparks, you might have historic markers, Hall of Fames, grave sites. There's public works of art. There's museum exhibits. And what you see on the left of the screen here is just a sample entry of what all the spots on the Heritage Trail look like. This one I used just for fun was the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in St. Mary's, Ontario. There's an address or coordinates that pinpoint where the location actually is on the map. And then a brief description. If there's a link that we can, link to a website, that's usually included too. Sometimes images are included, but this is the basic information, and this is all it ever intends to be, is just enough to get you started on what you're looking for. So where did this idea come from? Its origins go back years, and we have our conference hosts, SABR and IWBC, to thank for all of this. Among countless project ideas, there were many conversations about how do we get new resources available for research, or how do we normalize the idea of girls playing baseball? How do we better connect the community out there who already cares about this and wants to find ways to step up to a higher level of involvement? So meanwhile, around 2017, I was finishing up my master's of library science, creating the first Women in Baseball Week event that you see also listed here that many of you have supported for several years now. And with access to educational resources fresh on my mind, the seed of the Heritage Trail was kind of planted, even if I was unsure what exactly that would look like. So flash forward a couple of years, we're all affected somehow by the pandemic, and I started looking for socially distanced things to do around my home city at the time, Pittsburgh, and I just started exploring. Now, some of the things that you're going to see here shouldn't surprise those of you who know me. I'm a huge history nerd. I'm a baseball fan. I love Batman and I love horror movies. So there was a ton of all of this to explore in and around Pittsburgh. I'm also married to a serious geocacher, if some of you are familiar with geocaching. So for years now, it's not uncommon for us to be out of the house nearly every weekend, and we're hiking through forest. We're tracking down filming locations, historic sites, or I'm going to some kind of horror movie convention. So that's why all of this makes sense for how I spend my huge amounts of free time. So next, I applied this same sense of adventure to women in baseball, which is yet another thing I've kind of obsessed over for the past 3 decades. And luckily for me, there's a ton to see around Pittsburgh. And it didn't hurt that Amazon's A League of Their Own series was also filmed in and around Pittsburgh. So here you can see kind of the diversity of how the diversity of sites mirrors the list I gave you on the first slide. Museum exhibits, filming locations, grave sites, etc. Conversations about what kind of resource to put together in the past seem to include everything imaginable. Where is every single girls' baseball program located? Or should we list every woman working in professional baseball? This all seemed a lot to undertake, and I found that if you try to do too much in the beginning, you end up getting started on nothing. So finding these sites around that were close to me sparked something, and it was more just this idea of this is what I wanted. This is what I was interested in. So wouldn't it be great if there was a map that showed you where the historic sites related to women in baseball were around the country or around the world? So that was it. Suddenly clear. That's what I wanted to do. Not long after this project started to come together, we all lost a very special person. Many of you were probably fortunate enough to know Shirley Berkovich. Those of you who didn't, I have no doubt that you know her through her work and her influence. Shirley was a founder of the IWBC and a tireless advocate for girls in baseball and sports. and a friend to many of us. So when we lost her in 2022, it was painful, but an encouraging reminder to kind of stop putting off your ideas for another day and to hustle on the things that are important to you. So, where do you start something that you've never done before? I think it's always helpful to remind yourself of your goals and do what comes easiest right away. For me, that was to start collecting information, and I just began listing everything possible that came to mind in a Google Sheet, which is kind of what you see here. These are the first, however many that is, of things I just knew to put into the site. The first two were historic markers located kind of near Pittsburgh. Mary Weddles was in Ohio. Um, no specific number in mind. I could look up addresses and coordinates later. The goal was just to start filling out the sheet. So from there, and what still continues today, are periodic deep dives into tracking down more locations not previously thought of, or um, honestly, yeah, just where, what kind of things do you want to see on the trail? This is just where I started. So learning about unfamiliar people or ballparks was truly where the fun really started. I've learned so much just researching things like this. Sometimes very late at night, you go down rabbit holes and you find new information, and it's great. The schedule on the right kind of shows how that sense of hustle unfolded just 2 years ago. So you see there was a couple of months of research, and then we're going to add it to the Women in Baseball Week calendar. Um, which is just a WordPress site, and then the map itself is a Google Map plugin. So very not super sophisticated technology we're using here, and I can't handle more than what I've used already. So, but this made it easy just to get the thing up and running, and yeah, we went live during Women in Baseball Week 2 years ago. So by the numbers, this is more fun, another way of looking at everything. Here's what the trail now offers. I included this early image of Australia, though we have more spots identified, particularly in Western Australia. But a lot of the historical content from Australia came from many of our friend and colleague, Tanith Harley, who's been one of several invaluable resources of information for this, highlighting just this idea that the Heritage Trail is a team effort, even if I'm the one plugging in all the information. So we currently have 11 countries on 5 continents. 456 identified spots are currently in that spreadsheet I told you about, and just a little less than that are actually on the map. And it's just probably because I haven't gotten around to putting them on the map yet. But on the left-hand side here, you can see all those different areas that are highlighted on the map, public work arts, exhibits, filming locations. I highlighted here 130 halls of fame. I had no idea till this week when I was putting this presentation together that that was the largest number. Some sites will overlap in a couple of different categories, but 130 halls of fame. And we all know it's pretty great that we have Effa Manley in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, but how cool is it that there are 130 other halls of fame that feature women in baseball in their collections and among their honorees. So what's on the trail? Let's look at some of the different kinds of entries you can find on the trail. Um, this part again with the ballparks. Historic markers, statues. Statues also probably falls into the public works of art category. You can see a number of different places represented here. All of these images would be on the site too because I took these pictures. I don't try to use photos that I either didn't take myself or have permission to do so. Archives, museums, and exhibits on the trail vary greatly in what they make available online, as well as how much they promote their collections. So for me, this is where the library science aspects really kicked in. All of this content has existed for decades, but organizing them in a central resource becomes a process requiring some thoughtfulness and consistency. So I've tried to write entries with a universal vocabulary and style, for example. So here on the right, where it might suffice for us just to say Cooperstown, when we're referencing the Hall of Fame, it's important to label the main attraction as the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, especially if there are multiple locations as there are in Cooperstown. And some locations, including many halls of fame, are resources or listings that are only available online. So I've been very diligent about finding physical locations that correspond with virtual locations, even if it's just an office or an email contact, but it's just as important to make sure those virtual locations are described as such in their entries. Grave sites were actually not initially considered to be included, although I'd clearly had tracked down many on my own from my travels, my weekend travels, as I mentioned before. Excuse me. Gertrude Ganot played 2 seasons in the AAGPBL and was one of 4 women from Kentucky who played in the league that I researched and wrote about in 2021. So I visited her final resting place in Louisville on a trip home and noticed that her 1995 baseball card is embedded into her headstone. So I was struck by this idea that someone could be coming across this, visiting the cemetery, seeing this baseball card, not knowing anything about it, but wanting to set about to learn more about it. So how many different ways had this been done, and how educational are grave sites in general? In my experience, they have been very educational and definitely worthy of inclusion on the map. So these are a few that I've been to. Alta Weiss in the top right makes no mention of baseball. The others demonstrate the powerful role baseball has played in their lives and careers. And so just to take a look at them, Olivia Taylor's you can't see very well here, but it does say Pioneer Negro Leagues Baseball. And she does have baseball imagery on her marker. Fun fact, she's also in the same cemetery as John Dillinger and President Benjamin Harrison, for other people who are just into random trivia like that. Betty Jane Cornett is just outside of Pittsburgh. She has a baseball on her marker, and again, it's hard to see, but underneath her name, it says "in a league of her own." And then Pat Scott gets more elaborate, showing her in full Fort Wayne Daisies uniform with baseballs and everything else in the league logo. And I just think this is cool. And if you didn't know anything about those leagues or about women in baseball, but you came across one of these, um, to me, that would be fascinating. So inevitably, questions or suggestions will arise about what's not currently listed on the Heritage Trail, which I always welcome. It just means to me that people are paying attention to it, which is great. As expected for any of us who work in women's baseball, softball is frequently mentioned, and I'm always careful not to conflate the two sports, but I am aware of the number of athletes who have excelled at both sports and have been honored in numerous ways just as elite athletes. So it's fair to say that I've made no effort to unnecessarily include softball, but any significant connection to women's sports to me is always worth mentioning. So the example I used here was Durham Athletic Park. I initially included this as a filming location for Bull Durham, in which Annie Savoy is a major character in a baseball movie fan favorite. Again, for the purposes of this project, I thought it was worth mentioning that the stadium was also home to the Durham Dragons of the Women's Professional Fast Pitch League for 3 seasons beginning in 1997. And you can see there, that's how I've listed that. And I think that's fine. I haven't experienced too many issues. Too many suggestions for things that I don't feel are appropriate for it, but it's been important for me to keep in mind that the trail needs not be exhaustive, only that it's accurate and it's updated. So, while your 8-year-old may have played a few weeks of Little League this year, unless there's a marker saying as such, or she's now on the US national team or something like that, I'm not likely to add your city's city park to the trail. Um, Honestly, that it's a work in progress takes some pressure off the trail needing to be perfect. Last month, I went to my first SABR annual convention in Minneapolis, and for the first time, I wanted to see in person the mural of Nicollet Park where the Millerettes played in 1944. So what you see here is not a mural of Minneapolis in winter time. It was just a white blank wall. And I learned that the mural was actually being moved. Now, the good news is it's going to be put up near the ballpark soon in a new location. But all this to say, new sites are going to appear, some are going to disappear, many will need to be updated. So the trail's never exhaustive and complete. But that's kind of the beauty. As we watch women's baseball continue to grow every year, and for me, knowing the site is always as updated as it can be on any given day and it's ready for users to find something of value, that makes me pretty proud of what we've put together and the state of the trail 2 years in. So why did I start this and why am I still doing it? Really, the only expected outcomes were to match this goal of creating something I personally wanted. This is a very create the things you want to see in the world kind of idea, and you never know what it might spark in others who else might be waiting for this exact kind of thing that you've created, or how it might be a jumping off point for projects that you haven't even thought of yet. So for me, it does all these things. It's a lifelong learning project. It's easily managed, as I've shown before, and it's useful on multiple levels. That's really what's doing it for me. This last point, I love the dual role the trail can play. Whether you're setting out on a road trip for fun or research, it's a useful tool. It's just as useful if you're exploring everything virtually from your own home. For the unselfish part, I love what it's doing for other people on a variety of levels. This has overall been nothing but a positive experience so far. Researching locations, building the map, and connecting with others. It's all fun. But these are a few examples of the Heritage Trail in action. These are either questions I've gotten or questions that the trail has answered. People tracking down filming locations. Your map helped me do that. That's great. Yeah, you had something wrong on your map, but here's the correct information. Very much appreciated. All these types of things you can find from visiting the trail, and that's really doing it for me, and I'm really happy about that. So finally, my last big point is this idea that representation matters. I doubt anyone in this conference hasn't either encountered obstacles firsthand to girls playing baseball or on some level just endured the barrage of disappointing conversations like, are you sure you don't mean softball? And, all of that. The quote here, America still doesn't put enough women on pedestals, is actually the title of a 2023 article. And among its citations is a University of Wisconsin lacrosse study that reveals only 6% of American monuments feature real women as their subjects. Um, which is kind of, it says a lot when considering a lot of the monuments might be historic markers. It might be, a fountain or a plaque dedicated to a woman. It's not the same as a statue. So those numbers are probably actually less. And for sports women, it's probably even less than that. But 6% was still surprising to me. The image here I included Wisconsin lacrosse's entry on the Heritage Trail, which is because Anastasia Batikas, who played for the Racine Bells in 1945, is part of that university's Athletic Hall of Fame since 1993. So what's next? No grand plans so far. As mentioned before, it's a long-term work in progress, so the goal is always to update as accurately as possible, but better research functions and search functions would be nice. I've never had a set number of locations in mind to make the trail seem legitimate or useful. I've just had my own fun goals, challenges. Beginning this year, I really wanted to get 400 locations by the end of the year, and we've reached about 460 spots last month, which is fun. I'd still love to have something in each of the United States and, of course, more countries represented, but I know that's going to happen, and I'm counting on all of you to send me ideas. Let me know when you see corrections that should be made, and reach out anytime that we might collaborate to make the trail more useful to anybody. So that's the basics on that. I do want to make sure I thank my baseball family, SABR and IWBC, who are always up for hearing about project ideas and are nothing but supportive. And particularly these four, Adam, Lynn, Josh, and Barrett, have been encouraging of all my baseball projects, but of just about everything I do, especially in this past year. So that's important for me to recognize the people who've helped me put this together and just, keep me sane while doing it. My contact information's here. We have a nice new short website, WBHT.org, takes you directly to the trail on the Women in Baseball Week website. And with that, I'll take questions or I will be at the conference all weekend in the chat, so you can hit me up there. So thank you very much, Marlene and everybody else.
Thank you, Ryan. That was most interesting. I learned something every time I hear you talk about the trail. We've got some questions in the chat. Barbara's asking, does there need to be a physical location for something to be in the trail?
So this is something I come with just about every week. There doesn't have to be. There's a lot of virtual only content as long as I can link it back to some kind of address, right? Sometimes that's just like an athletic Hall of Fame. They may not have a physical Hall of Fame, but I will link to their where their athletic offices might be, on a university campus, for example. Um, we had, some of the college clubs that have been brought up recently of, do you need to list those teams on there? I don't know that we need to list these teams, but the sites that they play at might be significant enough to put on. And again, this could all change too, if we find enough reason to add some sites. And I think better too many than not enough. And if it helps people find what they're looking for. So yeah, it's my own criteria that, I go back and forth with, pretty much every week. But
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Well, Michelle Murray has a great idea about making a passport for the Heritage Trails. Take it on her baseball road trips with her daughter. Sounds good.
I actually love that. And that's something right when we started this, thought of like the things you see like for national parks and things like that, or even local parks and rec. They have passports like that. And I'm really interested in coming up with some kind of virtual thing that we could do with that, where you could log into the website maybe and mark off the places you've been and things like that. And it's all coming, but just add to the list of cool things that we want to do.
Are you thinking of creating an app for this as well?
It just depends. Like it does work. I mean, there is the mobile version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about as useful as the desktop version, which could always be improved. Sometimes apps can get expensive depending on what all you want them to do. So I think for now the mobile version works okay. It would work a lot better if I had better search functions. Um, but it does work, especially if you're in like a browsing type of situation. Like, I was in Milwaukee last week. I knew I had spots on the trail in Milwaukee, and you can easily bring this up and see what's close to you. And so on that level, it works pretty great, but there's always room for improvement.
So how would you like to accept suggestions? Cecilia has a great idea about before and after SABR conventions. There should be trail site adding sprees.
Oh, I love that. Really just reaching out through the website or through my contact information here, or you can find me at IWBC. But the Women in Baseball Week website is usually great, and those emails come directly to me. And yeah, lots of ways.
Great. I think you'll probably be getting a lot more places as people know about the site and the trail and send you things. We've got a few more minutes if there's anyone has any other questions. And Ryan, could you talk a little bit about how Women in Baseball Week is related to the IWBC and or SABR?
So Women in Baseball Week was a project started in 2017, and the idea was just mostly a social media campaign of how do we create more awareness around this idea that women and baseball is a thing, right? For all those people who seem to not know that. And so this was when, again, I was finishing library school in Pittsburgh. So libraries were my first kind of target for that. Where can you learn about women in baseball outside of the ballpark? So libraries, museums is where I really focused a lot of attention. And that first year, I know I've told this before, but like the very first Facebook post about Women in Baseball Week. The very first year was from St. Louis Cardinals because they were doing an exhibit at their Hall of Fame about women in baseball. So it spoiled me that the Cardinals, a Major League Baseball team, was the first people to talk about Women in Baseball Week. But since then, it's been really great. And it's, all different levels of small teams and museums and writers and libraries, everybody kind of coming together and just showing off their part of women in baseball, how they support it, and projects that they're doing. So it's different every year, which is kind of cool. And honestly, Heritage Trail was not really a part of that, but just kind of this logical extension. It's one more way, it's one more avenue to get the information out there that already exists, but look, here it is all in one place. And that's kind of the idea with Women in Baseball Week too, is um it tries to be a unifying event where you're not alone. I think we've heard that a lot already this morning. Of it's probably the most important thing all of us can do is let people know that you're not alone in this journey. We're all not going to be best friends and get along or maybe agree on what kind of projects we want to do or how we get there. But just knowing there are other people who care about this, there are other people willing to help you do whatever you want to do. If the Women in Baseball Week event or the Heritage Trail can help in that, we want to find ways to keep doing that.
Well, it's certainly been a joy to watch it grow over these past couple of years. And it's amazing for me to see how many events are going on now. It's just opening a whole new, wide, wonderful world of women's baseball for me and for lots of folks out there. So appreciate all your work with this and everything else that you're doing.
And thank you so much. And thanks you all.
Thank
Thank you all
you.
for everything you're doing too.